There are no enemies here, only the thing wearing their faces. When Marcus Rowe woke, the room was already screaming at him, and something behind the bathroom door was breathing as if it had been waiting for him to open his eyes. The light kept flashing, sharp and hateful, cutting through sleep in white wounds. A moment later, a loud sound joined it, something close to a siren, long, metallic, merciless. From the deepest pit of his mind rose a wave of ringing irritation. Sleep had been so sweet, so complete, maybe the best thing humanity had ever invented, and now it was being torn away from him with unforgivable cruelty. There was no other word for it. Barbarism. Security protocol breach. This is not a drill. All personnel proceed. The flat voice of the station AI pushed through the noise again and again. Marcus jerked upright on the bed and tried to peel his eyes open. Hell, he had slept hard. So hard that for one empty second he could not even remember his own name. The shapes of the room came to him through fog. His skull felt split down the middle, and his mouth was dry as dust. Computer status, he forced out, barely moving cracked lips, feeling his tongue stick to his teeth. Name Marcus Rowe. Personal identifier 1DQD1. Position, acting commander of the mining shaft on Asteroid Caldera. Right, that explained something at least. He clutched his head as broken scraps of memory surged into his mind, tangled with nightmare images he did not recognize. The pain sharpened until he almost hissed through his teeth. Lovely, what is happening? The commander carefully put his feet on the floor. Why is the alarm active? Delayed order execution, the AI replied. Delayed order? What order? No data. That was new. Marcus looked down and realized he had been sleeping naked. Perfect morning. He had not done that since he was 10 years old. Swaying a little, Rowe headed toward the bathroom. A cold shower was exactly what he needed. At least water was not scarce on Caldera. In 5 minutes he would be functional. There was nothing to fear yet. With an alarm active, no one could enter his cabin without authorization. Still, what had happened? Asteroid mining had never been easy work. The conditions were too strange, the gravity too unstable, the corridors too narrow, the risk of tunnel collapse too constant, and the psychological strain too familiar. That was why the operation ran in rotations. During 10 years in the field, he had seen plenty. Gas leaks, life support failures, decompression, even a pirate raid once. But an alarm with no data attached to its initiation, that was a first. Maybe the system had glitched. Either way, he had to make himself presentable and get to command. From his personal console, he could pull a full report. Food would not hurt either. The bathroom door opened, and a rotten smell struck him in the face. What died in here? The commander grimaced and felt along the wall for the switch. They really should have installed motion sensors. After a few blind seconds, the click finally came. Rowe screamed and stumbled backward. Almost an entire wall of the bathroom was covered by a pulsing cocoon. It looked like a slab of meat sealed beneath a thick layer of slime. It twitched and softly sucked at the air, wetly shifting, unmistakably alive. What in the? He did not finish. From the swollen mass of alien flesh, thin flexible tendrils shot outward. Even 1 second of hesitation would have ended badly, but his hand was already on the lock control. The heavy door slammed shut, swallowing the strike of the attacking strands. The impact made him flinch. Oh hell! A tremor crawled through his body. That dead piece of rock had always been just that. Dead rock. Where had something like this come from? What was it? Rowe moved toward the wardrobe. As he dressed, he examined the cabin carefully. There were no signs of forced entry. That meant either the creature had opened the door with his key card and settled in the bathroom while he slept, or it had crawled in through the ventilation or the drain system. But for that it would have needed to be much smaller at some point. I definitely did not bring that beauty home in my arms. No one can drink that much, he muttered, and with shaking hands checked the pistol. By regulation, He was the only person on the station allowed to keep a firearm, just in case. The ridiculous part was that he had never fired it anywhere except the range. He managed a small industrial site, not a warship. He could only hope the pistol was capable of damaging whatever had taken over his bathroom. He gripped the weapon and thought for a moment. Going back into the bathroom was the last thing he wanted, and there was little point anyway. He needed to understand what was happening, how long things had been wrong, and why he remembered none of it. Marcus snatched the key card from the table and unlocked the cabin door. The alarm had stopped, and the corridor greeted him with crushing silence. The dim light painted black stains of shadow across an already grim scene, and each one seemed deep enough to hide something. Why the living sector had been designed to press on the nerves like this was beyond him. Probably because the people who designed remote microcolonies never had to live inside them. Rowe moved forward, studying every detail around him. Long ago, back in college, he had taken a course on old Earth popular culture, especially films and games from the 21st century. He remembered being amused by space horror. Now the genre resembled his situation far too closely, with one important difference. The player and the viewer were safe. He was not. Apparently every interior designer in the mining industry had taken the same elective. The silence pressed harder, broken only by the low mechanical hum of the station. In all his years on Caldera, Marcus could not remember this part of the complex ever being so quiet. Even during the artificial evening and night cycles, someone was usually talking softly, laughing in the lounge, or watching a film. His gaze drifted toward that door. Unlike the others, it was not locked. Most likely the latch had failed again. The lounge was rarely secured, so repairs to that door always slid to the end of the rotation. Rowe approached carefully and, after making sure nothing rushed him, slipped inside. The room was chaos. Furniture lay overturned. Dishes, personal items, fragments and broken pieces of something had been scattered across the floor, but none of that held his attention. Around several tables that had been shoved toward the center of the room ran a clear, foul-smelling trail of slime. It looked as though something heavy, slick, and wet had been dragged through the room. Rowe went cold. What the hell is happening on my station? The trail led toward the kitchen and disappeared into the dark. The commander frowned. He had no desire to follow it. He stepped back and his eyes caught the control unit for the large wall screen. A frozen black image suggested that someone had been watching a recording, maybe a film, though the frame looked more like operational footage. Trying not to make noise, Marcus picked up the remote and tapped play again. The screen came alive, showing the familiar, tiresome interior of a mining cut. It looked as though the recording had come from an automated tunnel borer. Standard procedure. When instruments detected something interesting inside the rock, mineral deposits, ice, or anything worth claiming, company policy demanded video documentation. A universal legal habit, meant to keep workers from answering unnecessary questions from management later. Without warning, the drill punched through into empty space. The machine followed its program and reversed. On the recorded comm channel, excited voices burst into overlap. Rowe stood with his mouth slightly open. "Well, I will be damned," he whispered. In the glare of the powerful work, lights hung something impossible, something no one expected to find buried inside asteroid stone, an unknown object of artificial origin. The voices on the recording grew louder, everyone speaking over everyone else. No wonder. A handful of poor miners on the edge of inhabited space did not get to write their names into history every day. "Do not outrun the booster rocket," said the skeptical voice of Dr. Maya Sen, the staff medic. "It may be an old satellite." Marcus almost smiled. Maya always had the most reliable sense in their small, gloomy world. Maybe that was the best quality anyone could have out here. He opened the menu and checked the date. The recording had been made 2 days earlier. so more than one full day had vanished from his memory. Strange and bad. He rubbed his temples and began scanning the file list, hoping to find something else. Reports, celebration. Rowe quickly skimmed through a video of the crew celebrating the discovery, then abruptly stopped the frame. There he was, standing aside from his subordinates. His expression was thoughtful, tense, the look of a man who had found a problem and could not solve it. So almost immediately after the miners made their discovery, something had gone wrong. That mattered even more because the security officer was absent from the celebration. "For an occasion like this, my signature recipe," said the shift cook, Martin Bell, from the screen. "You will lick your fingers clean." Rowe shook his head. The cooking by Martin had worn everyone down long ago, but no one better could be hired for that pay. He could only hope no one had earned digestive revenge that day. Though at the moment, questionable culinary skills were unlikely to be the main problem. Besides, no one had ever wanted to tell the cheerful big man the truth about his talents. The commander selected a file titled Security Service Appeal. The face of Martin filled the screen, pale and frightened. "I am making an official report," he said. "Something is wrong in the galley. About 5 years ago, a transport brought rats aboard, and no matter what we tried, we could never get rid of them. Bold little bastards. They were not even afraid of me. Sometimes I had to defend our supplies physically before a shift started, but today it is different. Since morning, not a single animal in the pantry, and that is not the main thing. I hear strange sounds in the ventilation, soft squeaking. And the smell coming out of there is pure rot. Take action." The recording ended with Martin leaning away from the camera and looking fearfully toward the ventilation shaft. "Rot, then." The commander rubbed his chin. "Familiar story. You will lick your fingers clean." The words came from the darkness. Marcus jerked around. Something impossible slid into the light, dragging a heavy body over the floor. It was grotesque and almost spherical, a chaotic heap of meat coated in a thick layer of mucus. On 4 sides of the torso, small rudimentary limbs clawed pointlessly at the air. At the end of a stretched neck hung the head of Martin Bell, slack and wobbling. The old, kindly smile still sat on the face. Fear seized Rowe by the throat. The creature slapped wetly across the floor and crawled toward him fast, pulling its lower body inward like a slug. Marcus fired, aiming at the head. The bullet punched into the body at the base of the neck. The thing did not even notice. "Same as always, Marcus?" it asked, coming within reach. Then it released the same thin tendrils. The commander recoiled, overturned the nearest table, and ran. Only one thought hammered in his skull: get as far as possible from the monster wearing the face of an old friend. Doors and compartments flashed past, melting into one smeared image, while blood pounded in his temples. The living sector was long behind him before he finally slowed. His heart was beating so fast that he nearly became afraid for his health. Still, he did not regret the panic. The intentions of the creature had been clear enough. The commander found himself in a relatively wide room packed with equipment and instruments. The station plans called it a hangar, though it deserved that name about as much as Martin had deserved the title of athlete. Not the worst place to be. From here he could take the side corridor, pass the infirmary, and reach command. Rowe wiped his forehead. He had to hope their small evacuation shuttle was intact and functional. Some inner instinct told him he might need it soon. But any decision required information. The suits at Central Office would demand a detailed report. On the other hand, they could fly out here and crawl through this filth themselves. In the last hour, Marcus had met no one except disgusting monsters. If he turned out to be the only survivor, he would not remain on Caldera for another minute. Still, it was too early to bury his colleagues. They were tough people. Rowe was not a rescuer, not a soldier, and not a xenobiologist, but he would do everything he could for the crew. After that, it was better to curse himself for cowardice from somewhere safe than end up like Martin. In the end, he was only a hired worker like everyone else, unlucky enough to spend chunks of life in this godforsaken place. He was definitely not paid enough to fight aliens. When his breathing steadied, Marcus moved on, trying not to make noise. The corridor leading to the infirmary was narrow. If surprises waited ahead, it was better not to announce himself. After a dozen meters, visibility worsened sharply. The small lamps meant for technical passages could not cut through the dense mist filling the space. Probably the hydroponics condensate drainage was failing. That might have been good news if Rowe had known for certain that the intruders relied on sight. From ahead came soft, unpleasant sounds. The commander slowed and listened. It was something between moaning and a whistling, diseased breath. It was hard to imagine station machinery making that noise. Rowe shuddered. The thought of seeing another colleague in the same condition as the cook frightened him to the bone. Marcus drew the pistol. The infirmary door should be close now, which meant some room to move. Maybe he could slip past unseen. Gathering himself, he quickened his pace. With every step, the vile sounds grew louder, feeding fear that was already too strong. The commander felt his back and forehead cover in cold sweat, while he silently prayed that whatever hid ahead had a weak sense of smell. To his right, colored indicator lights appeared, like fireflies lost in fog. Under other circumstances, they might almost have been beautiful. His mind only recorded the fact. The infirmary door was nearby. The moaning breath became much louder. Then, at some point, he had the impression that its source was almost beside him. His heart accelerated again. At this rate, a heart attack would kill him before the monster could. "Marcus, is that you?" The hoarse voice was female, familiar and human. The commander stopped. The voice sounded as though its owner could barely breathe. Putting two and two together was easy. The worst part was that he had not found the alien. Apparently it had found him. Rowe looked around again. The corridor seemed empty. He pressed himself against the wall and began edging forward, trying to control every angle. "Marcus, help me. It got me, Marcus." There was real suffering in the tone. Rowe clenched his teeth. The voice belonged to Nora Keene, the security officer. They had been close as two lonely adults at the edge of the world could allow themselves to be. Something cold and slippery touched the back of his neck. He flinched away and turned. From above, the familiar thin tendrils reached toward him. Rowe stepped back and tried to see the creature. Almost directly over him, half hidden by fog, hung a cocoon nearly identical to the one he had found in his bathroom. The tendrils stretching slowly toward Marcus grew along the edges of the formation, but the center was the worst sight. From inside it, the eyes of Nora stared down at him, full of pain and pleading. Her body had fused with the foreign flesh, forming a single organism. She moved weakly, trying to free herself, failing each time. Her legs were hidden somewhere deep inside the mass, which somehow made the sight even more obscene. The commander felt pity and revulsion surge together. What could he do except? His hand rose by itself, bringing the weapon to bear. Nora jerked convulsively, her face twisted in a grimace of agony. "Do not make it last," she breathed, "please." Rowe pulled the trigger. This time he did not miss. The shot cracked through the corridor and bounced from the walls. The head of the security officer fell limp, and the sound stopped with it. Only the tendrils kept crawling stubbornly toward the new victim. "Goodbye," Marcus whispered, turning away and wiping tears from his eyes. The rest of the way to command passed without incident. As soon as Rowe left the corridor, the fog thinned and visibility improved, easing the pressure on his overstrained mind. Soon he would get out of this nightmare, and then he could say farewell to Nora properly. But now was not the time to surrender to grief. The keycard slid across the sensor, opening the door he needed. Before entering, Rowe carefully looked inside. Nothing alien was visible. "Freeze!" someone shouted hysterically. "Do not move." The voice was female and perfectly human, but experience had already proven that did not mean much. "Who is here?" Marcus searched the room with his eyes. "Not a chance," the unseen woman snapped, a little steadier now. "Enough. Whoever you are, we have known each other for years. You have no reason to threaten me, and even less reason to fear me. I am not dripping slime, and I am not sprouting tendrils." Rowe carefully stepped into the center of the room. His workstation, set on a small raised platform, was isolated from the rest of the command center by armored glass, a relic from the old days when pirates had ravaged this sector. It was the last chance measure for mine leadership, a barrier that could buy a few minutes to call for help while attackers cut through it. Normally, the isolation system stayed inactive, but the alarm had done its work. Rowe looked down at the pistol, somehow back in his hand, then tucked the useless weapon into his belt. "You know, occupying the station of the commander while the commander is alive is a serious breach of corporate code," he said loudly. His guess was right. From behind the chair, the head of Dr. Maya Sen cautiously rose. "Doc," Marcus said with real relief, taking a step toward the glass, "I am so glad to see you." "Do not come closer," the medic replied. "Maya, it is me." Rowe spread his arms to show he was not holding the gun. "What happened? My memory is failing." "Failing?" she asked with poisoned suspicion. "Yes, I have completely lost the last 2 days. Maybe more," the commander admitted honestly. "Or maybe you never had them." The voice of Maya trembled. Marcus had worked with her for 3 rotations, but he had never seen her like this. "I woke up in my cabin and found something in the bathroom. On the way here, I met several freaks with the faces of our crew. You are the first normal person I have seen, and I have no idea what the hell is happening." "That is the problem. If you are Marcus, you should understand everything," Maya said. "He had a plan. It almost worked." "Maya, pull yourself together. It is me. My head hurts. Maybe I hit it somewhere and got back to my cabin on autopilot. That is the whole story. Let us figure this out, find anyone else alive, and get away from here." Marcus exhaled. Most likely no one else was left, and maybe that was a mercy. The woman stepped out from behind the chair and approached the glass. She looked exhausted. Her usually neat hair was a mess, and dark shadows lay beneath her eyes. "When did you last sleep?" Rowe asked gently. "I do not know. Long ago." "You are the medic. Think what insomnia does to the mind under extreme conditions, and understand that this is me, your commander and your friend." Marcus took a careful step forward. Everything he needed was on the other side of the barrier, and only the medic could open it. Maya stiffened. "Take off your clothes," she demanded suddenly. Rowe stared for a second. "What? Why the hell do you need that?" "Now or we are finished talking." "You have lost your mind," the commander said, already stripping. "Now turn around." Rowe gave her a pointed sigh. "Do what I say. It is necessary." The medic moved closer to the glass and studied him carefully. Well satisfied, he asked irritably, "Maybe." She sank to the floor, drained. "You can dress." "Thank you, Doc." Rowe obeyed with enthusiasm. "It began about 2.5 days ago," Maya said, no longer looking at him. "We received an interesting sensor signal, decided to investigate it, and found that thing inside the rock. An alien device of unknown purpose. I saw the recording in the lounge." He nodded. "And inside that cursed machine, something was alive. The closest comparison is an aggressive colonial microorganism. I cannot say more. We do not have the equipment, and I do not have the training. During the first 36 hours, it absorbed almost everyone." "Absorbed," Rowe repeated, stunned. "Ate them, drank them in, digested them. I do not know. Everyone who came into contact with that filth died in agony." The voice of Maya rose. You decided to blow the station. You planted extra charges in the shafts, and you and Nora tied the whole system to the reactor controls. Then why are we standing here, instead of sitting in the shuttle on our way home? The commander frowned and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Contact with you disappeared while the last charge was being armed, Maya said, lifting her eyes to him. After that, Nora came to me 3 times. The first time the thing had only her face. The second time it came naked, speaking broken phrases out of place, and a vertical split ran through her entire stomach. The third time was the worst. I almost believed it. She spoke, moved, acted exactly like herself. She complained about back pain and said something had torn there. But when I told her to undress, thin, long tendrils like worms were sticking out all over her body. I think I saw something like that. Rowe shivered. I locked myself in here after you left. I am afraid to go out, and I do not have the courage to overload the reactor. Maya sighed heavily. Once we start the process, we will have at least half an hour to reach the shuttle. Together, that is possible, Marcus said. And for that I only have to let you through the barrier, the medic finished for him. Yes, from my console, it will be much easier to reconfigure everything. We do not need an instant explosion now. He shrugged. What do you say? I am scared, Marcus. I am still not sure that it is really you standing there. She shook her head and stepped back. It cannot reach inhabited worlds. Behind the commander came a strange, quiet sound, something like thick liquid bubbling unpleasantly. He turned. Nothing seemed to have changed. The same workstations, the same locked door. Even if the creatures, whatever they were, tried to break in, they should not be able to. The black goat with a legion of young, Maya suddenly said, and gave a nervous little laugh. What was that? Sorry, an old horror line I read when I was young, she said. She was about to add something else, but suddenly froze, staring past the commander. Her face slowly changed, filling with horror. A blade of ice seemed to pierce the heart of Marcus. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He followed her gaze and swallowed with difficulty. Through vents, cracks, service gaps, and technical seams, a thick, bubbling, shapeless mass was entering the room. The familiar stench was already spreading through the air. It had come for the last survivors, and apparently it did not need the hands of its puppets to open doors. Hell, Rowe breathed. Maya, let me in, now. The medic bit her lip and shook her head. Tears ran down her face. You want me to die out here, damn you. Only sobs answered him. The medic had completely lost control. The glass could not be deactivated from outside. That required access to the console of the commander, and even if it could, the risk was too great. Raising and lowering the barrier took time, which meant the biomass now filling the room would have every chance to reach them. There was only one option left. The reserve tunnel. A small, narrow passage, isolated even from ventilation. It had only one purpose, to let the person trapped behind the barrier escape if everything else failed. It was almost impossible to use under normal circumstances because it connected the 2 halves of the command center. Still, right now it was the best chance Rowe had. Maya, on the back of my console there is a hidden button. Find it. His voice shook. She kept shaking her head, crying. Listen to me. I know you are terrified, but if you do not help me now, you will condemn me to a horrible death, and then you will be alone with that thing for real. He looked back quickly and saw the alien mass creeping closer. Please help me. I cannot, she forced out. What if it is not you? Let me in. I do not want to die, not like this. Self-control was beginning to abandon Marcus too. His body trembled. He pressed himself to the glass and beat his palms against it. Maya, please. He looked back again and felt fear and disgust fuse into something sharp and absolute. The decision formed quickly. Marcus Rowe had no intention of writhing in agony. while alien bacteria ate him alive. He drew the pistol and pressed it to his temple, keeping his back against the barrier. Inhale, exhale. His fingers settled on the trigger. No one dreamed of such an ending, but at least it would be his ending. He would not become Nora. To the left of the commander came a soft hiss, and a small opening appeared in the wall. Marcus threw himself inside without thinking. The automation would hold the tunnel door open for no more than 5 seconds. He had to make it. He tumbled into the crawlspace, striking hard surfaces several times on the way. The hiss repeated. The passage had closed. The commander got to his feet and hurried forward. More than anything in the universe, he wanted to kiss Maya. This disheveled, exhausted woman had become the most beautiful creature alive. He burst into the sealed side of the command center, as if on wings. The medic stood against the opposite wall, holding an empty mug in front of her for protection, a weapon of last resort. "Thank you," Rowe said, stepping toward her with honest emotion. "You saved my life." "Do not come closer." She made a threatening gesture, as if the mug were a knife. The commander stopped. The appearance of Maya, her absurd weapon, and her frantic attempt to avoid touch awakened something unexpected inside him. Under the horrified stare of the medic, Marcus bent forward slightly and began to laugh. He laughed harder than he had ever laughed in his life. Tears poured from his eyes and his stomach cramped, but he could not stop. Soon, the thin, squeaking giggle joined his hoarse, booming laughter. At least 10 minutes passed before they managed to calm themselves and breathe normally again. By then the mass had filled the entire command center outside the barrier and was pressing against the glass. "Nowhere to run," Rowe said, wiping away tears. "It seemed to know that if it trapped us here, we would have nowhere left to go." "Maybe, I cannot judge what that monster can do," Maya said, growing dark again. "You said it was microbes. Can microbes think?" "Who the hell knows, after everything we have seen here." Maya spread her hands. Marcus stepped closer to the barrier and stared into the thickness of the mass. Suddenly the face of Nora emerged from the depths. The pale lips of the security officer moved, trying to form words. "Let us in, Marcus Reed." Then the face of Martin appeared, followed by others from the station, one after another. The commander groaned and backed deeper into the room, closer to the instruments. The images of people twisted, stretched, and compressed inside the alien jelly. "I am going to be sick," he admitted. "Do what I do. Do not look," Maya said. She had turned away from the barrier a minute earlier. Marcus closed his eyes. In micro-colonies like this one, personnel deaths were a sad, ordinary fact. He had always known he might die out here, and if it happened, no one would be left to grieve for him. But imagining this ending for everyone he had worked beside for years was almost impossible. The people of the station stood before his inner sight, mutilated by some foreign, malicious will. He wanted to cry like a child waking from a nightmare. Only this time, unfortunately, everything was real. The commander straightened his shoulders and walked firmly to his console. His fingers moved over the sensors with familiar speed, turning a final plan into action. "What are you doing?" Maya asked. Her voice sounded close, almost behind him. Apparently she had finally relaxed. Good. Spending the last hours of life trapped in a room with a paranoid person would have been a doubtful pleasure. "I am preparing our final chord. How long can a person live without food or water?" Absorbed in the work, Rowe did not turn around. "About a week," the medic answered confidently. "I will start a timer. If we do not find a way out in 7 days, the computer will activate the charges. And if we decide to end it earlier, the red button is right here." Marcus felt his legs weaken and grabbed the edges of the console. The strain of the day had finally caught up with him. The commander groaned softly. Relief did not come. "Maya, help me, I am falling." Only a strangled wheeze answered him. The hands of Rowe slipped loose, and he slid to the floor, striking his nose painfully. Something was very wrong. Weakness spread upward in a numb wave, climbing toward his stomach. What the hell is happening? With great effort, Marcus rolled onto his back and raised himself on his hands. His trousers were torn open, reduced to wet scraps soaked with pale blood. Beneath them, alien flesh writhed. Stunned, the commander tried to locate the source of the infection and saw the body of Maya. The woman lay very close, still wheezing. From what had become his legs, a bundle of slick leech-like growth stretched to her distorted face. They contracted rhythmically, as if pumping something into the head of the medic. With each movement, the face of Maya changed almost imperceptibly, swelling and merging with the foreign tissue. Soon the line between the body of the woman and the invading flesh became hard to see. The thing had still managed to reach the survivor. Nausea surged through Marcus. Checkmate, beautifully played. Was such a move possible without a mind? He looked through the glass, where the main body of the victorious invader shifted slowly. The body of the commander swelled, tearing his clothes apart, while tiny worm-like sprouts rose from his skin into the air. His thoughts began to ferment, replaced by something else, something nothing human could name. It was like a faraway choir of indistinct voices repeating something important in an unknown language. Rowe grew hot. He tore open what remained of his shirt and gasped for air. Numbness climbed to his chest, preventing him from breathing fully. His body was failing. Or was it still his body? The red one, need the red one. The tangled thought hung by a thread inside his fading mind. With the last of his strength, groaning and trying not to pull tight the slimy leeches greedily burrowing into Maya where she lay helpless, he reached for the console. In the corner of the touch screen, a large red circle was blinking. Mother, Marcus heard his own voice say, just before he disappeared.